I find Genesis 3 to be a really interesting verse of the Bible because it starts with now the serpent was more crafty than any of the wild animals the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, did God really say, you must not eat from any tree in the garden? So the serpent's talking to Eve, but I don't think Eve's actually been named at this point. And then they talk about how if you eat from the tree in the middle of the garden, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you end up dying, but you don't die. And for God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. I find that interesting because that is what happens. They understand good and evil. And of course, if they hadn't done this, the rest of the Bible doesn't happen. It's just two guys sitting in the Garden of Eden, just sort of hanging out. So So she goes to the tree, she eats the tree, and desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and ate it. She also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. Then both of them were open, and they realized they were naked, so they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. Which, like, okay, realizing you're not clothed and making fig leaves, cool. Um, in real reality of history, the reason clothes were invented was actually as protection, not because people were offended by people's skin. It's actually just for protection because people needed protection from the elements, protection from the poison of plants, protection from the snow, protection from the rain, all that. Um, And then they hear the Lord God walking in the garden. They hid from him. The Lord called to the man, where are you? I heard you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid. And he said, who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree that I commanded you not to eat from? The man said, the woman you put here with me, she gave me some fruit from the tree, and I ate it. Then the Lord God said to the woman, what is it you have done? The woman said, the serpent deceived me, and I ate. But I don't think the serpent deceived her. The serpent actually told the truth. You'll gain the knowledge of good and evil and won't die. The serpent tells the truth here, and God lies. And then God curses the serpent, basically makes it have no legs. Basically, he creates snakes here. And then between you and the woman and hers, he will crush your head and you will strike his heel. That basically explains how snakes works. And then God just says, I'll make your chains in childbearing very severe with painful labor. You will give birth to children. Your desire will be for your husband and he will rule over you. A lot of people use this verse to talk about how it's biblical for a woman to listen to the man and only the man and have to be subservient. Subservient to the man, which, like, okay, it's a thing, and I understand that that is essentially what you would get that. And then to Adam, because you listened to your wife and ate fruit from the tree about which I commanded you must not from it. Uh, God cursed the ground. Um, Through painful toil, you will eat food from it all the days of your life. Essentially, he said, you're going to have to make your own food, and then it'll produce thorns and thistles, and you will eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your brow, you will eat your food until you return to the ground, since from it you were taken. For dust you are, and to dust you will return. And then Adam named his wife Eve because she would become the mother of all the living, which is just really weird for that to just be verse 20 after verse 19. Um, and then they get banished from the Garden of Eden, and then basically it just creates lavender, or not lavender, fucking agriculture. After he drove the man out, he placed on the east side of the Garden of Eden cherubim and a flaming sword flashing back and forth to guard the way to the tree of life, which is like, wow, he's really upset. He is really, really upset that they ate from this tree, which, like, I understand. He told them not to, and he's like, you'll live here forever with me, and blah, blah, blah. But what I don't But what I don't like about this particular verse is that it really blames the snake when it's not the snake's fault. It's not Eve's fault, not Adam's fault. It's God's fault for lying to them. And like we learn later in the Bible that God doesn't lie, but God is certainly lying in Genesis 1 through 3 when he talks about how you can't eat from the tree of life or the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Two different trees that they're not supposed to eat from, which, whatever. Um, I personally think it's kind of interesting that God's so upset that they eat from the tree that he causes painful childbirth and agriculture. One of the worst things people go through, and one of the coolest things we have. Like it almost reminds me of the story of the abduction of Persephone. I'm not saying it's the exact same, but it reminds me of that with how Demeter, when Persephone was first abducted, she essentially just made it so that nobody could have food, and then all the crops were just dying. And then once everything got worked out, things went back. It reminds me a little bit of that, not fully, but just enough that like just there's just enough that I'm like, that's interesting to think about. So yeah, that's Genesis 3, and that's some fun stuff there. Don't forget to like, subscribe. I'm gonna make some more videos later. Plenty of stuff coming up in a moment on the Bible Hockey Network. I'm not Rick Jenneret, and this isn't hockey.